All right, so you want to dive deep into Hezbollah, huh? Not just the headlines, but the whole story. Well, buckle up because we're about to unpack a fascinating document. Timeline of Terror, a concise history of Hezbollah atrocities from the Henry Jackson Society.
Yeah, this document is, well, it's definitely coming from a particular angle. But don't worry, we'll break down those key takeaways and give you the full picture.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1982. Lebanon is already like a powder keg of different factions. And then Israel launches Operation Peace for Galilee. PLO is operating there. Syria's pulling strings. Talk about a tense situation. What were the events, would you say, that really led to Hezbollah emerging in this whole mess?
Right, you've practically painted the picture. It's a pressure cooker situation in Lebanon.
Mm.
So the Henry Jackson Society argues that Hezbollah arose in direct response to this Israeli intervention. They were fueled by a segment of Shiite leaders who, wanted to fight back.
And this wasn't just any resistance movement. This was the era of the Iranian Revolution, this massive wave of passionate change. And guess who swoops in to offer training and weapons? Iran's Revolutionary Guard. What kind of role did they play in shaping Hezbollah's identity early on?
Think of it this way. Iran's revolution, it was like this powerful engine. And they saw in Hezbollah a chance to, really project that influence.
Mm.
The document's pretty upfront about that connection.
Interesting.
And while we're on the topic of outside influence, Syria, under Hafez al-Assad, they also backed Hezbollah early on. Their reasons, well, they were a little more, let's say, strategic.
Right. It's more about politics than shared ideology, like moving pieces on a chessboard.
Exactly. Syria had their own interests, strengthening ties with Iran, putting pressure on Israel, maybe even countering other groups within Lebanon.
So Hezbollah, even from the beginning, they're tangled up in this web of alliances and rivalries, but they also have their own goals, right? Liberation comes up a lot.
Right. And the document's pretty clear that Hezbollah's idea of liberation has two main focuses.
Okay, so what are we talking about here?
First, they're aiming to liberate Jerusalem and what they consider Palestine, which, includes all of modern-day Israel.
Meaning they don't even recognize Israel as a legitimate state. They want to see it gone.
That's the gist of it, yeah. Their second goal, and this one's maybe less prominent these days, is establishing an Islamic government in Lebanon. Something similar to Iran's system.
I see.
Now, even the document admits this particular aim has been more of an aspiration, especially recently. But it definitely influenced their actions early on, shaping their trajectory.
So we've got this group, born from conflict, backed by powerful forces with their own agendas, and driven by this really strong ideology. But here's where it gets really interesting. Hezbollah is not just a militant group, right? They evolved into a political party, they're involved in social services, they even run a whole TV network.
Yeah, it's this seeming contradiction that makes Hezbollah so fascinating. How can a group advocate for armed liberation while also being part of Lebanon's political system? It's wild.
It's like they're living in two worlds at the same time. Some people even call it a state within a state, holding real political influence, but still with their own armed militias.
Definitely a balancing act. And it raises all sorts of questions about power, ideology, and what even makes a group legitimate. It's complicated stuff. It really is. Some of these incidents, they stick with you. And then there's the 1983 bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut. Hundreds of American servicemen lost their lives. It's just, this document really drives home the human cost of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not talking about statistics here. These were real people, real lives lost. It's heavy stuff. And the barracks bombing, that was a turning point, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, it raised huge questions about Hezbollah's capabilities, their goals, their relationship with the West, with the U.S. especially.
Yeah.
This attack, along with several others, is ultimately why the U.S. labeled Hezbollah a terrorist organization in '97.
And that's a big deal, right? That designation comes with serious implications.
Totally. Sanctions, intelligence sharing, even potential military action. It's a major signal. But it's not a universal label. And this document brings up a really interesting point about the EU. They've resisted officially calling Hezbollah a terrorist organization.
Really? That's surprising. What's the reasoning there?
Well, the document suggests that the EU is concerned that blacklisting Hezbollah outright could actually backfire, like create more instability in a region that's already incredibly volatile. Plus, there's the whole issue of Hezbollah being so deeply embedded in Lebanon's political system.
Right, so which is it? Are they freedom fighters, terrorists, a legitimate political party providing essential services? It's like trying to untangle a giant knot.
It's messy, that's for sure. This document highlights this strange duality of Hezbollah. They have real political power, yet they're accused of these serious acts of violence. It's a tough one to wrap your head around.
It really is. And let's not forget, none of this comes cheap. The document mentions state sponsors, but also hints at some shadier stuff. Where does all the money come from to maintain this kind of infrastructure?
Right, follow the money, right. The document points to Iran and Syria as the primary bankrollers, but it also mentions things like money laundering, drug trafficking, even connections to the diamond trade.
Wow.
It paints a picture of an organization with a lot of different revenue streams, some more clandestine than others.
So sophisticated, really. And speaking of sophistication, we have to talk about their media operation. It's impressive. Al-Manar, their TV network, it's not just propaganda broadcasts. We're talking music videos, soap operas, even game shows.
Yeah, they're savvy. Winning on the battlefield is one thing, but to really exert influence, you have to win hearts and minds, right?
Yeah.
The document emphasizes just how effective Hezbollah is at using media to shape the narrative, not just within Lebanon, but across the whole Arab world.
It's a whole different kind of strategy, but clearly effective. This document, though, it only covers events up to the 2006 war with Israel, if I'm remembering correctly. Have things changed since then?
Yeah,
Right, we can't just stop the story there in 2006. This document, it might be called Timeline of Terror, but it feels like things have been quieter since that war with Israel. What's the deal? Have they changed tactics, would you say?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? The document argues that Hezbollah is still a major force, even if things have shifted.
Yeah.
Like, they point to that attempted assassination of the Israeli consul in Turkey back in 2011. And then there were those alleged plots against Israeli tourists in Bulgaria in 2012, right? Serious accusations. Even if some were stopped, it suggests that, yeah, maybe Hezbollah's methods have gotten more, let's say, discreet. But their goals, those haven't really changed.
So, still laser focused on Israel, but working in the shadows more. And then there's their involvement in the Syrian civil war. That whole thing started in 2011, right? The document only mentions it briefly, but it does say the U.S. slapped sanctions on Hezbollah in 2012 for backing Assad's regime.
Right, and that's huge. It just shows how interconnected all these conflicts are. Hezbollah's actions in one place have these ripple effects everywhere. A lot of analysts say their involvement in Syria was about protecting those supply lines from Iran, maintaining what they call strategic depth against Israel.
Hold on, strategic depth, what does that even mean?
Basically, imagine you're playing chess, right? Strategic depth is like having more space on your side of the board, more room to maneuver, more options. For Hezbollah, influence in Syria, it gives them a buffer zone, a way to project their power outside of Lebanon. It makes them a much tougher opponent.
That makes a lot of sense. So where does this all leave us? It's clear Hezbollah is a major player, politically influential, providing social services, but with this incredibly complex history of violence, this document calls them a dangerous terrorist organization. But it also recognizes those other roles they play. It's a lot to process.
It really is. And that's why this whole deep dive has been so important. This document, it's one perspective. Their perspective is that Hezbollah is a threat, first and foremost. Yeah, they acknowledge the political stuff, the social programs, but they're saying it's all part of a bigger plan controlled by terrorists. But it's so important to remember there are always multiple sides to these complicated stories.
You're preaching to the choir here. One person's terrorist is another's freedom fighter, right? It all depends on your point of view. We've gotten one perspective on Hezbollah here today, and it's definitely given us a lot to think about, but it's just one piece of a much bigger picture.
Exactly. To understand a group like Hezbollah, you have to be comfortable with nuance, with seemingly contradictory information. It's not about saying what they're doing is right or wrong. It's about understanding the complexities of the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So to you, dear listener, we leave you with this. How can an organization be so dedicated to liberation while also being so deeply involved in a political system? Can they be both a political party and engage in the kinds of things we've talked about today? These are the tough questions that researchers and analysts are still grappling with, and they're at the very heart of understanding Hezbollah's legacy.
Keep asking those tough questions. Keep looking for different viewpoints. The more we know, the better equipped we are to understand these complicated issues and hopefully work towards a more peaceful future.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the world of Hezbollah. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.